Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth Boland. I'm chair of the New England chapter of NACD. We welcome you all to what couldn't be a more timely and important program on why the most inclusive companies will win. And we're so delighted to have a true expert in this field, Carol Fulp, and moderated by Chris Odleifson, who is one of our board members for NACD. Before we get to the program, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, please everybody put yourself on mute. If you're not already, we will put you there because we don't want chatter in the background. We do, however, want chatter in the chat room here. Please put your questions there and feel free to add any comments that you'd like. Sometimes we have a healthy discussion among our attendees in addition to hearing from our featured speaker, and we love having that too. If you'd like credit for today's program, make sure that your name is visible so that we can get you down and get you on the list to give you credit. And before we start, I would love to recognize our sponsors who are the lifeblood of these wonderful programs. This is a list of the New England chapter sponsors for whom we are extraordinarily grateful. And today we'd like to spotlight one sponsor in particular, Rockland Trust. Rockland has been a fantastic sponsor of the New England chapter for many years under the leadership of Chris Odleifson, and who has recently stepped down as CEO of the organization, but they continue on to support NACD's mission, and we are very grateful for that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Odleifson. He is, as I said, the former CEO of Rockland Trust, sits on the NACD New England Board of Directors. He is a wonderful and very committed board member and a true leader in the community. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Beth. It's wonderful to have everybody here today for, as Beth said, a very current and a very important topic, inclusion in the workplace. Now, this has once again become a national focal point. Everybody's aware the last major surge in awareness followed George Floyd's murder, prompting many companies to increase funding and commitments. Now, 5 years later, we're witnessing a pretty big shift. Now, we've all read of some pretty big companies scaling back their commitments in response to an environment of activist pressure, executive orders, and Supreme Court decisions. Today, we are just delighted and honored to host a chat with Carol Fulp, founder of Fulp Diversity. Welcome, Carol. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. Let's start with a little background. I hope everybody has had a chance to read Carol's very impressive biography, but I'd like to just highlight a few things. Carol is a thought leader, national speaker, and an advisor to more than 100 CEOs on advancing organizational inclusion. She is the author of Success Through Diversity: Why the Most Inclusive Companies Will Win. Now, I first met Carol during her tenure as CEO of the Partnership. The Partnership's a national organization dedicated to developing multicultural executives and professionals. And during my time as CEO of Independent Bank Corp and Rockland Trust, I saw firsthand how many partnership program graduates strengthened our organization. And Carol, I mentioned to you that my number one example is my fellow executive chief human resources officer, Maria Harris. And we did a lot of great work together. And I really appreciated how the partnership was a contributor to her success. Prior to the partnership, Carol was SVP of Corporate Responsibility for John Hancock Financial. And lastly, I want to mention that President Barack Obama appointed Carol as representative of the United States to the 65th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And Carol, this is a real testament to your remarkable impact. So welcome, Carol. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today to talk about inclusion in the workplace.
Well, Chris, thank you. And thank you for all you do. I so appreciate your leadership and your willingness to have this very frank conversation. As you've mentioned, the partnership We can't mention the partnership without mentioning Benny and our dear Flash Wiley, who recently passed away. And so we want to acknowledge the leadership that Flash brought the partnership as he supported his wife, Benny, who founded the organization. And we want to really acknowledge his leadership in the Boston business community, particularly as he was the first African American to chair the Chamber of Commerce. So on behalf of Flash, thank you and thank everyone here on this call for all they do to ensure inclusion in our business community.
Well, thank you, Carol. Well said. I'm really glad you mentioned that. Carol, inclusion has been central to your career for decades. To begin, maybe would you talk about your experience that really have shaped your life's inclusion work?
Well, you have to go back to the beginning, Chris. And I always say that I've been so fortunate. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I've had the unique opportunity to walk with my parents, to march with my parents on the March on Washington in 1963. So that has been ingrained in me. Because of that march and because of the impact of that march, I saw doors open that were closed. I was able to go to an integrated school. We were able to move into an integrated neighborhood. I understood the importance of communities coming together to advance all. So much so that when we had the 60th anniversary of the march, I asked one of my proteges, Leslie Feinberg, who is of a different generation, a different race, and a different religion, to come with me and let's march together for the 60th anniversary. And I wrote an op-ed in the Globe about the importance of coming together to advance inclusion so that we all can be a better country together. That's the only way we can do this work. So my passion for inclusion comes from a world that had opened up that was initially closed. And so I do whatever I can to ensure that others have the opportunity to walk through that door that I walked through. I am so cognizant that others fought and even died so that I could be having this conversation with you.
That's powerful.
My role is so small, considering what others did for me. So I come to this work with that passion, but I am not a social service CEO. I come out of business and I approach the work from a business perspective. And I want to approach the work from a business perspective. I want people to understand the business value of inclusion, not necessarily the moral value. For that, I go to church. But I want people to understand, what is the business value of inclusion? Why is it that we are better off as a corporation when we are more inclusive? And so that's the approach I take with the passion I have from a little girl.
That's so you bring a lot of personal experience and then a sort of empirical data-driven experience that asks, how do you produce business results? That's a strong combination. Now, I know you've studied this a lot too, looked at the data, and I know you've looked at studies that actually show and sort of like, okay, here's the arithmetic. It actually plays out. Can you just give us a sense about what you have discovered in examining these studies, what they say?
Well, I appreciate you referring to the data, because it is all about the data. And when we look at the studies and we look at the data, we want to first step back and look at the foundation. So let's step back and let's look at our workforce population, and let's look at our marketplace today. So the US Census Bureau indicates that by 2045, this will be a country where there are more people of color than Caucasians. Today, there are more babies of color born than Caucasian babies. So our population is browning. Our marketplace is browning. And so what we want to do is make sure we can have the opportunity to produce goods and services for that marketplace. And so our workforce has to reflect that marketplace. And then when you look at women, we know that 47% of the workforce is women. And when you look at the college-educated workforce, 51% of the college-educated workforce are women. Those are our future managers.
Mm-hmm.
And so are we doing everything we can to prepare that particular pool of individuals to be managers?
Mm-hmm.
We also want to be understanding of the fact that today there are 5 generations in the workplace, more than ever before. There's the greatest generation, there's the baby boomers, 15% of the workforce are baby boomers. There's Generation X, there's millennials, 36% of the workforce represents millennials. The largest generation are millennials, not baby boomers anymore, but millennials. And when you look at millennials in the workforce, millennials represent 43% of them are those of color. Again, getting back to the browning of America.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at Gen Zs, 20% of the workplace is represented by those in Gen Z, in the Gen Z group. And 50% of Gen Zs are of color.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a really diverse population that is coming up who will represent our workplace and who will represent our marketplace. It's really also interesting to look at, well, where are these populations residing? And most of the populations of color, the growing population, the populations that are growing the most are Asian Americans, Latinos, and multiracial individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And the areas that they are residing in, where you find them most, Texas and Florida.
Interesting.
And so you look at what's happening in those states. Are we inclusive in those areas? Or are we more resistant to this change that's occurring? So that's the population. That's who we are becoming. So then let's just take a look at the studies. Again, we want to look at this from a business perspective. Okay, that's who we are. That's our workforce. You know, that's our marketplace. So does it matter? Well, let's look at what the studies say.
Mm-hmm.
McKinsey says that companies with ethnically diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams by 36%.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have more diversity working together, better performance. Companies, they also say companies with above average diversity in management, in those management teams, they report 19% higher revenue because of innovation. Again, reflecting this bringing together all different types of individuals. When you allow everyone to have a seat at the table, that's better for the company. It's producing more revenue. It's enabling you to be more creative, more innovative. Everybody is sharing their ideas. They're bouncing off of one another. It's not the same idea. It's more diversity of thought that you are allowing. And then gender diverse executives are 15% more likely to achieve above average profitability. So when you look at what McKinsey is saying, it just makes good business sense for your workforce to reflect diversity. When we look at board inclusion, PCG indicates that companies with the higher board diversity report a 21% increase in revenue. So those at the highest level who are making really strategic decisions, you have utmost diversity and are able to make the best decisions. And MSCI indicates that companies with diverse boards see a 35% lower risk of experiencing something you care about, experiencing a governance-related controversy. Again, because you have people with different experiences at the table who can share their different experiences and sensitivities. Again, it's not just one lane reporting. It's all different types of experiences that you have at the table that they can share information and the best decisions can be made. So we really value that diversity, but it's not only ethnic diversity, it's not only gender diversity. Our country today, we know that LGBTQ, 7% of the population is indicating that they are part of the LGBTQ family. 7% of the population are veterans. There are those with disabilities, religious differences, socioeconomic differences. All of this is reflective of diversity, but most important, all of this should be reflective of inclusion. How are we including all of these different thought leaders at the table so we can produce the best goods and products for a very creative, innovative market that is very different than the market 20 years ago?
Well, clearly you have got your numbers straight. You've done a lot of work, and clearly you do understand.
It's about business.
Yeah, about the market is changing,
Yes.
and the McKinsey study. I imagine that all translated higher revenues, higher profitability. That translates into a higher share price,
Yes.
which creates shareholder value, which is, one of the principal concerns of a board. And how do you create shareholder value? So it all sort of points that direction. In our previous discussions when we're getting ready for this, I was struck by your comment that simply having surface level diversity differences in around the table leads to more of a comfort level to have differing opinions. And I thought that was very powerful, and combined with some research I've read by a psychologist, I think her name is Charlene Nemeth, who published research showing that dissent or different opinions leads to better, more creative decisions amongst all sorts of groups. So all the data, a lot of the studies sort of really point in this direction of having sort of a diverse set of opinions and views around the table. So, well done. Well, I think is there anything more you do focus a lot on, hey, listen, the moral case, as you said, you take to church, and the business case you take to the boardroom. Is there anything more to be said about that? Sounds pretty compelling. And maybe in the past we've brought those two together, and has that maybe hindered our ability to think about the business case when we bring the moral case into the equation? How do you think about that?
I think that when I think of that experience, I when I think about your question, it brings me back to my work at the UN, where I had the opportunity to work with Ambassador Susan Rice and Secretary Hillary Clinton. And during that period, women's issues were talked about and thought about every day. And they were thought about every day strategically, because the UN was an organization that was focused on creating peace around the world. And of the 17 led countries by women, there were no wars. And so what saying was important is that supporting women was the smart thing to do, not necessarily the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So in that particular case, it was strategic to support women because
Mm-hmm.
of the mission, because of the value, because you wanted to ensure there were no wars. And as we used to say at the American mission, that women are the peacekeepers and men are the warriors.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just focused on our mission of keeping peace and who was reflective of that. And women have consistently been known as, when you support them, their families benefit, their communities benefit, and their countries benefit. So
Mm-hmm.
how can we create more women leaders? Our communities and our countries will be better. And that's strategic,
Mm-hmm.
not winsome. That's strategic.
Mm-hmm. Carol, I want to ask one follow-up question to the data piece, and then I want to change tact a little bit. Now, there's a lot of rhetoric over the last couple months that sort of brings up sort of a point of view that I thought we sort of had put to bed a long time ago. And that is this notion that inclusion and meritocracy, high performance are mutually exclusive. You can't have one with the other. Now and it seems like people are sort of saying that more these days publicly. And I thought maybe you and I could just sort of stick a fork in that a little bit today. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think you're asking someone who I'd like to think I don't represent that. I think that it's important, no matter who you are, that in an organization, we hire the best talent.
Mm-hmm.
We hire the best talent, and that talent could look like anything from A to Z. Particularly given the numbers I shared with you.
Right. Yep.
We are not asking you to do anybody a favor. We're asking you to hire the best talent of all kinds.
Mm-hmm.
That talent just looks different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't understand and I don't agree how one could think that they're separate.
Right.
There's no way that this country is going to survive when you don't hire or when you don't develop the best. And the best, given our population, just tends to look different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way we need to think of it. And when I think of inclusion, and I say this very strongly, when I think of inclusion, inclusion also includes white males. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want anyone to think that inclusion does not include white males.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion includes everyone. And we'll stick a pin in that.
Yeah. I really like your expression talent from A to Z.
Yeah.
Because it is all about talent and it's all about expertise. It's all about broadening our search for the best talent. And
Yes. And
if
what,
we
yes,
just focus on one letter, we or two letters or half a dozen letters, we don't have the benefit of all the letters, of all the talent.
Oh, I love how you've framed that because, again, it reminds me of an experience back at the UN. I was having lunch with the ambassador to Nigeria, and he said to me, and I'm going to say it the way he said it to me. He said, "Can you afford to win the race if you were only running on one leg?" And in this particular case, he was talking about women.
Mhm.
If you are only hiring men, you're only running on one leg. But what you want to do is you want to hire the best talent of all kinds.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you are missing out. You're not going to win the race.
Mhm.
Your competitor will.
Right. Yep. Very, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. I think we did a good job sticking a fork in that one. Uh, okay, Carol, I want to move on to a question I'm sure everybody has brought with them today. Uh, our audience knows that diversity efforts are facing really significant legal and political challenges. The Supreme Court struck down race-conscious admissions. The NASDAQ board diversity rule was overruled. There have been multiple executive orders, and um, major companies such as Google, Target, Amazon, Meta, McDonald's, Walmart. This is what my Google search tells me. That Boeing, Lowe's, Tractor Supply, John Deere, Harley Davidson are all scaling back inclusion priorities. And yet, as we know, as you so compellingly described, inclusion adds value. And adds shareholder value and adds community value, adds community value to the world. And there are a few companies who are sort of doubling down and say, yes, that's true. Costco, Apple, Delta Airlines, and Cisco have all reaffirmed their commitment to inclusion. So we have a lot of directors in the audience today who sit on boards who are probably asking themselves, well, how do I navigate the shifting landscape? What advice would you have for these directors?
Well, thank you for asking that in this challenging environment. But first, I want to say that we've been in challenging environments before. And we're going to get through this as well. When we think about challenging environments, I think about Reconstruction, when 200 Blacks held positions in Congress. But out of Reconstruction came the Ku Klux Klan. And so we had a whole different frame as a result. I think about the McCarthy era, when so many people were ostracized and so many people lost jobs because they were told that they were communists. I think about COVID, when we just didn't know where we would be, but yet we came out of it. So we're going to come out of this period too. So I ask individuals not to dismantle, not to retreat, but to evolve.
Mhm.
And that's an important framework to have. So knowing you and I would be talking about this, I have 10 points.
Okay.
Again, numbers.
Okay. We're
Again,
all ears.
numbers.
We're all ears, Carol.
Numbers. So first, just 5 days ago, Harvard Business School produced a really great video. It's only 10 minutes, but Professor Victor Ray has a video on the future of diversity in business. And it's great for your directors to be able to see. And he talks about, we've got to be in this for the long haul.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's some really great information that can be shared, whether it's statistics, whether it's the importance of diversity and inclusion given the marketplace, whether it's don't give in to fear, but look at what's best for your organization. I
Mhm.
think just having a video, and I might say, because Chris, you and I know how direct I am, and you're so cognizant that, you know, when you are in conversations with individuals who are direct, your colleagues tend to be more direct too, and we've enjoyed that about each other. But this video is from a white male, and frequently the message around inclusion is best received from a white male. And so I say in this particular case, ensure that your directors have an opportunity to see this particular video from this lane. The other thing is that we know that in organizations, your workforce, whatever is happening externally, they bring in. So you have individuals who are frustrated, scared, stressed. That's all coming in the organization. So you're dealing with that regardless of how great an organization you are. So know that's what your organizations are feeling. And so again, don't dismantle, be driven by the data.
Mhm.
And as Professor Ray would say from the video, don't follow the wind.
Mhm.
Follow the mission of your organization. You know, be driven by the business case. Be driven by the data. And what we're asking you to do is to evolve your culture. And you and I've talked about this before. When we think about evolving the culture, we quite frankly think about evolving the terminology,
Mhm.
because there's some terminology today that's outdated, and we don't want to use that. But what we do want to use is terminology of the future,
Mhm.
inclusion, belonging. And given what I've indicated that employees are experiencing outside of the company and bringing in, we want to ensure that employees are psychologically safe, that
Mhm.
they feel that the culture here is safe, no matter whom I am,
Mhm.
no matter what political party I belong to. This is a safe place. And when employees feel they can bring their whole self to an organization,
Mhm.
again, from a business perspective, they're 30% more productive.
Mhm.
So again, that makes good business sense. So at
Mhm.
the end of the day, focus on building shift, focus on building innovative cultures. And so when you ask, well, what does it take to build an innovative culture? Excuse me. What does that look like? As we talked, as we saw in the data, innovation has to ensure that you have diversity of thought.
Mhm.
So you need different types of people in the organization. So if we're going to be innovative, we have to have talent of all different kinds. It just makes good business sense. So that's also important. When we think about our companies through this destabling times, just let's acknowledge it's destabling.
Mhm.
But we're in this for the long haul. So we're
Mhm.
thinking long term. So while individuals come to us and might say, don't do this, we look at the data and say, well, wait a minute. You know, if this is the workforce, if this is the marketplace, if this is what's going to result in greater innovation, in greater profit share, it just makes good business sense that
Mhm.
I'm as inclusive as possible. And let me just focus on that. Don't give in to the headwinds. Do
Mhm.
what's best for your business. I'm rounding up to 9 now, Chris. And then align yourselves with other organizations who think similarly, organizations outside your industry, so that you're getting information from others, you're learning from others in these disabling times. It's great to be able to learn from others, to be able to share, to be able to commune in this time when you sometimes feel alone. But it's great to be able to have partners in this work. And then finally, this is something I believe in so much, and I've made reference to it before, is however you change in your organization, however you evolve, engage middle managers. Middle managers can implode a project of any kind. It is so important to engage them. They're getting pressure from the top, they're getting pressure from underneath. But it's so important to ask them, what do they think? What are they experiencing? Is this going to work? What would they want? What would they do? It's really important to value and engage middle managers in changing and shifting your culture.
Carol, I have a couple follow-ups to those excellent comments.
You always do.
But first of all, I think we'd like to get the link of that video in the chat. So
Okay.
I think Larissa, maybe Carol, could you give Larissa just a couple of keywords and she can Google it and get it in there?
Yes.
Is it
The Future of Diversity in Business by Victor Ray, Harvard Business School.
Great.
The
Excellent.
Future of Diversity in Business.
All right.
Victor Ray, and it's 10 minutes.
Fabulous. So Larissa, if you could look that up and post it, that'd be great. So I'd like to come back to this notion of terminology. You know, there's the old terminology and there's a new terminology. And, you know, you do read a little bit about, well, are we going to think about, are companies who are staying the course simply doing the same things and calling it different words? And does that subject boards to the wrath of hiding behind different terminology? I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric around that out there. Should boards simply say, listen, we want to continue on the path, but we're going to have to reframe it a little bit and use new words? Or how do you think about that? What counsel would you give directors?
I think two things. I think new words, terminology has to change because our times have changed. Quite frankly, they've co-opted terms. And so give them up. So give those terms up and focus on the future. Focus on the future, and let's think about where some of the issues lie. Some of the issues out of prior diversity training lie in that individuals, management felt that we were blaming them. We weren't really including them, that they were the problem. I don't want anyone to feel isolated or that they're the problem. No, I know what it feels like to feel different, alone, small. I know what it feels like to be the other. I don't want anyone, no matter who you are, to feel outside. I want everyone to feel included. So if we're doing things that make anyone in the organization feel excluded, feel blamed, we need to stop that and we need to reframe it. So you and I have talked about this. I don't do unconscious bias training. I don't want to go to unconscious bias training. That's negative. It's saying to someone, you're doing something wrong, come here, and we're going to tell you how to do it right. And so you come in with this negative attitude. You come in with an attitude that's already negative. But what I do want to do is I want to be a good manager. So I do want to be able to, I want to go to a managing for the future. Managing during transformational change.
Mm-hmm.
So I term the sessions managing for the future, managing during transformational change.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about what that change looks like, talk
Mm-hmm.
about what it looks like in terms of technology, talk about what it looks like in terms of the workforce, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the marketplace, and talk about, well, how do we navigate that? How do we manage that? How do we manage 5 generations in the workplace where one might say, meet me, the other might say, call me, the other might say, write me, the other might say, email me, the other might say, Slack me. They're all different. How do
Mm-hmm.
we manage realizing that's different? How do we manage? How do we manage all the cultural differences? Because I want to be a good manager.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all these different kinds of challenges that are different today. So how do I navigate it?
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of diversity, what gets in the way? And that's where I have the opportunity to approach our unconscious bias that we all have,
Mm-hmm.
and how let's be aware of it and leave it at the door. We can pick it up and take it home with us. But
Mm-hmm.
when we are working, that we leave it at the door, that we become conscious of it. And we become conscious of our body language. We become conscious that make sure to include Jose, make sure to include Mary. For me, make sure to include white male, rather than be intimidated by them because, they traditionally have not acknowledged me, whatever. But
Carol,
include everyone.
Carol, you are articulating a very looking forward perspective, right? It's sort of, let's not sort of rehash the past. Let's not think about, what you consider potentially 400 years of history. Let's focus on the opportunities ahead of us, and let's figure out how we seize them together. Is that sort of a, a, a appropriate takeaway from what you've said here?
I think it's an appropriate takeaway, but it's also appropriate. It's also instructive for us to really grapple with and understand our country,
Mm-hmm.
and understand who we are and our history, and how our history is institutionalized in our structures. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I've said this to you before, that as slavery ended, restaurateurs said to slave women, well, I'm not going to pay you. You'll have to be paid by the tips you make. So as a result of slavery and the restaurant owners saying, I don't have to pay you based on the culture of this company.
Mm-hmm.
You can get paid, but not the traditional way. You can get paid because of tips. As a result of that history of our country, this industry forever till today is paid less than
Mm-hmm.
other industries.
Mm-hmm.
That's a result of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It's important for us to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
It's important for us to understand there's the master bedroom. That comes from being the master. So we don't call it the master bedroom. It's the primary room. This is all institutionalized. And what's institutionalized is women and pay,
Mm-hmm.
and the pay gap. So while we're looking forward, I also want us to understand what is institutionalized, and unless we address it, will continue to bring us down. And that's why I think it's important to recognize, like payday, equal
Mm-hmm.
payday, because
Mm-hmm.
it's important to advise people that white males make more money than women. They make more money, and when you break it down even further, they make more money than Asian women, Latino women, Native American women have to work up until November of the next year to be equal to what a man made in December of the prior year.
Mhm.
So I want people to understand that. That's nothing that you did, but that's institutionalized.
Mhm.
So unless we work to change that, it will stay the same.
Mhm.
So that is a part of our future as transformational managers to make that shift and to change that.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Carol. Backing up a little bit to the director question. Think that what should directors be asking from their management teams in terms of metrics? To sort of you talk a lot about. Oh, you just disappeared there for a second. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, you're okay.
I can.
Okay, great. What should directors be asking their management teams for the metrics for them to see the data of what's going on in their company? What are some of the important things for them to ask?
I think it's important, again, no shame, no blame. I think it's important for boards to look at the data together. So let's start by looking at the workforce population 10 years ago. Let's break it out, by women, by ethnicity. Let's look at it 10 years ago, and then obviously look at it in terms of levels. Let's look at it 5 years ago.
Mhm.
Let's look at it this year. So rather than saying we should be here, I think it's really more important to look at an organization over a particular time frame. So let's look at us. So that's number one.
Mm.
And let's look at our competitors, because we look at our competitors for sales. We look at our competitors for so many other things. Well, what are our competitors doing? And there's ways to get that kind of information. And then the other thing, I think it's important for us to lay over that our population, our workforce population, our marketplace, and then what do we want to look like?
Mhm.
But first, let's look at our trends. Are we staying the same?
Mhm.
And if so, from a business perspective, do you know how expensive it is for us just to have people come in and leave and come in and leave?
Oh, yes, I'm very familiar with that. That's very
Yeah.
expensive. Yes.
Yeah. Because that's what we're doing if our numbers are just staying the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the cost of that?
Mm-hmm.
So does that make sense? So I think we need to just sit back and have a conversation to first look at our history, what we look like, where we are, and where we need to be to continue to be profitable.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good. Carol, you've worked with a lot of CEOs across the country on this very important topic. When you sit down in their offices and have a conversation with them, what are some of the challenges they and their boards are sort of forefront of their mind? What are the hurdles? What are the obstacles? And how do you counsel your clients and and the boards to navigate those challenges?
I have some clients who indicate, we are really committed to diversity and inclusion. And we realize that will prevent us from getting federal money. That they have made that decision. We have invested a lot. We've been very public about it. We're very comfortable the way that we've handled it, but we understand we will not be getting grant money. There are others who realize that given regulation, that they're far more tied to the situation, and that they have to be, as my good friend Sharon Pratt, the former mayor of Washington, says, they have to dance within the raindrops. And they have to be able to continue the work. They have to be sensitive to terminology. Inclusion and belonging. Inclusion includes every employee in your company. And you can't really refute that. Belonging includes everyone in your company. Making your company psychologically safe, making it safe, that's everyone. You're not singling one group out over the others. If you have ERG groups, they're open to everyone. It's not just for one group. Anybody can participate. Just making everything more open. And so what we always do is work with the attorney before operating these days. But we still are having programs, particularly given what the workforce looks like, particularly given what the marketplace looks like. So we're having diversity programs where recruiting at a variety of different schools, we're inclusive in our recruiting. Again, when you take a look at it, it's not just one area, it's every area we're recruiting at, for every school.
Very good. We talked a little bit about how you ensure this is a sustainable effort versus sort of a one-shot deal. I mean, what we've seen over the last 5 years is a big spike investment, and then now we've it's been dialed way back nationally. What do you counsel your directors in terms of how you make this a long-term sustainable, in it for the long run effort?
Like, I go back to that point about engaging middle managers, engaging management in the solution. This is not an HR initiative. This is a company-wide initiative. This is an initiative about having an innovative culture, inclusive culture. So if our responsibility, if our goal is to have an innovative culture, how do we do that? What would you suggest? How do we ensure we're as competitive as possible? We can't just hire one group. That's gonna, that won't last. How do we fan out? What challenges do you have that we can help you with? So I think it's really important. We've seen so many programs that start from top and say, we're gonna do this, and don't include the people who really operate. And I think they have the answers. You can share with them, here's the data. Here's what's really going to move us in the future. What would you suggest? I always suggest taking your top performer and creating a task force, not having an initiative come out of HR, but taking your top salesperson and having a task force that would include middle manager, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, generational diversity, a small task force to help shape what is the culture, what of the company going to look like. And you have HR as your arm. HR is there for you, obviously, but have that manager and that group report to the board, report to the CEO and the board. But it signals to the organization when you have your top performer working on this initiative, it signals that, oh, this must be really important. inclusive culture, this must be really important.
Mhm.
And then you have a middle manager who their suggestion becomes an initiative. And even if you have a few of the recommendations that go forward, the recommendations come out of the task force, come
Mhm.
out of the employees who've made those recommendations.
Yeah, I think you're getting at a point that I really think is very important, which is this is not something to be delegated. I mean, the big task. This is owned by the board. It's owned by the CEO. And to say to sort of, okay, well, we have some inclusion initiatives. HR, would you please take care of it and report back to me? And I'll think about other things in the meantime. No, if this is important enough to create the shareholder value as you described, this is important enough for the board and the CEO to really engage in it. Yeah. Carol, I thought what we might do, if it's all right with you, is we might see if there's any questions in the chat, and then we'll come back and sort of ask, sort of what are maybe we can do some wrap up on what are the 3 or 4 major things we want everybody to leave with today, and we can do that together. Would that'd be good, unless there's some things we want to cover before we do that.
Yep.
Okay,
Happy to go to questions.
Ellen, do we have a question or two that we should address?
I think you've actually been touching on most of them. I think one of the challenges, I think that it's come up several times is, and I'll quote one of the questions, getting the best talent is not just about choosing the best talent, but making sure that we reach out to make sure the pool includes the best talent. So that's come through in a couple different ways in some questions. So maybe you could touch base on that. Some of the others that have been asked, you've actually been addressing.
Okay, great. Yeah, talent. Well, so here we go. We come back to talent, Carol. I mean, this is the talent that creates value and getting the best talent.
Well, we'll step back and start with culture.
Mhm.
We really want to be able to create a culture that is inclusive, that is creative, innovative, exciting. And we want to create a culture where everyone can succeed.
Mhm.
And if we don't have that culture, we're not going to get the talent. I once talked to a client, here's an example. I once talked to a client, and they're a strong company. And there was an African-American executive woman who they were very excited about. And they had her interview a number of people, maybe 15 people for this job.
Mhm.
And she decided not to take the job. And they were devastated because they were invested in her.
Mhm.
And do you know why she didn't take the job?
Tell us.
Because she didn't talk to anybody who looked like her.
Interesting.
And so from her perspective, this terrific executive African-American woman said, great company, but there's nobody like me. And they're great people, but you know, I as a manager, I might be alone, but you know, where's the emotional intelligence? Where's the sensitivity? Where's the inclusion? So I'm sure the company was just thinking, let's make sure this individual sees the talent they need to see who the job would be working with. I'm sure, right? I'm sure that's the practical, right? And what should also have occurred was let her see all the people she would be working with, and let's let her see a couple of other people, a couple of other women executives, women of color executives who've done really well here. And what they can say about the company that we can't. And so when one gets the talent, it is about being as inclusive as possible. And frequently, Where you get the talent is by asking the individuals, in your company, who would you recommend for
Mm,
this?
mhm,
Because if you've got great talent of difference in your company, you want more people like them. And
yeah.
you also want to let them know you want more people like them here. So help me. I think that is really something that is of such value when the company says, you know, I want to be able to be as inclusive as possible. We'd love more people like you. You've got a network that I don't have.
Mm,
And you help refer people. Not even when a job's open, just continue to refer. How can we help build the network that you have? Because we value who you are and want to have more like you.
mhm.
So those individuals become your recruiters. And then you and I have talked, Chris, about the Rooney Rule, which I'm really a big fan of, is ensuring, you know, when you do interview that pool is diverse.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, I think we've read about some examples where the Rooney Rule was sort of been just a check the box sort of thing. So how do you make a Rooney Rule really uh, um, meaningful, where you really are sincerely looking from A to Z for talent?
I can give you one example. Natixis had a senior executive role open, and they used the Rooney Rule. They wanted to see a diverse slate of candidates, great candidates. And at the end of the day, they hired a white male for the position because
Hmm.
they were the best fit for the
Hmm.
position. But in
Hmm.
the pool of candidates, they had seen a really great Latino woman.
Hmm.
And they knew this doesn't come around often. And so they were able to find an opportunity in another part of the company for her because they realized we have talent here. We don't want to lose this. We don't, this function, this other person is a better fit.
Hmm.
And that's where that's why I find it odd when you say, you know, you don't have the skills to meet the job. No, we want the best person to meet the job, you know, but if you're skilled, there's opportunity for you in a number of places.
Hmm.
And they found a place for the senior executive woman. And they were so thrilled that had it not been for the Rooney Rule, had it not been for the Rooney Rule, the CEO was thrilled. Had it not been for the Rooney Rule, she would not have been seen and they would not have had this hire.
I wonder whether we should just sort of remind everybody what the Rooney Rule is. You know, it occurred to me maybe we should define that up front. Can you just sort of?
Mhm. A number of years ago, the NFL found that there were not a lot, there were very few, I should say, very few Black coaches in the league. When 70% of the players are Black. And so Dan Rooney of Pittsburgh, who owned the Pittsburgh Steelers, and headed up the diversity committee at the NFL, created a program that said if you're going to, before you interview before you hire a coach, I should say, that you have to have a slate of diverse candidates. And so it's had mixed results, but there was one period when, as a result of the Rooney Rule, they had two coaches of color playing off of each other in the Super Bowl. Had it not been for the Rooney Rule, that would not have happened. And we had that this time, didn't we?
Oh, I don't, I'm not a big sports fan,
I
so
think we did.
yeah, I'll
Someone,
leave that to
someone,
you.
someone will tell us.
Yeah.
Someone will tell us. So the numbers have increased. You could, we have had a couple of years ago, we've had instances where people just went through, they just went through the changes and they just went through the work and just interviewed, but had no intentions of hiring, had an idea of who they wanted to hire. But as a result of that rule, as a result of saying you have to have diverse candidates in your slate before you can make the hire, there have been more coaches of color hired. And that Rooney Rule has transferred to the legal field. Heather Campion knows that because she is in recruitment. And certainly Beth knows that. But it's been transferred to the legal field and to a number of different areas. And it's been decades now that the Rooney Rule has been in existence. So we always use it because it enables people of difference to be seen. And it enables managers to see people of difference, but make the decision of whom is the best person for the job. We're not telling you who to hire. We want you to make sure you see a diverse slate of candidates. And we also,
make sure we go A to Z.
yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carol, why don't we sort of transition to sort of our three takeaways, things that we'd like to leave our audience with today. Do you want to go first? I'd like to.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, something we've talked a lot about is focus on the data. We started with that. Let's take a look at population. Let's take a look at marketplace. Let's take a look at what the studies indicate and what's driving our business, because that's the business case. So first, let's look at the business case for this work. And why do this? We're doing it because it makes good business sense, number one. And as in any area, we request that you not when it's not working, if something's not working, don't dismantle it, evolve it. So maybe things were rushed, done too quickly, too sensitive, maybe people were too sensitive, too scared. Oh my God, well, let's do what makes good business sense. So let's evolve diversity to inclusion, to make sure we're not blaming anyone, to make sure we're not saying, well, you're biased. There's a reason why we don't have enough, women. There's a reason why we don't have enough people of color, and you're the reason. Let's not even go there. Let's talk about how we evolve our culture so that it's reflective of the marketplace and reflective of our workforce, and it's going to drive our business for the future. And it's going to allow us to hire the best talent of all kinds. So let's focus on the data, number one. Let's evolve. And we're going to evolve, including evolving our terminology. And then three is about the people. And let's ensure we engage our middle managers, because we can't operate our companies without them. But let's acknowledge them. Let's engage them in this very difficult task, but say, we need you to succeed. And the only way we're going to succeed is if we get your opinion, your buy-in, your support. And it's the only way we can succeed if you make it work, because it really is your company.
Very well said, Carol. I when I was thinking about what my three takeaways would be, I wrote them down before you got started talking and about this, and they're pretty much aligned. I mean, I'd say business case, the data, the facts, shareholder value. Two, I'm just going to use my second takeaway was use your expression, talent, A to Z.
Uh,
I
I
think
like
that
that.
really
I like that.
captures the notion. And the third is something you brought up is networks. I mean, thinking about expanding networks,
Mm,
because you have expanding and overlapping networks, that will include everybody over
yeah,
time.
it
Yeah, I
allows
remember.
you to get your A to Z.
Right, right,
Yeah,
exactly. So I thought those
yeah.
are three very powerful concepts you brought to the table today. So Carol, is there anything that's we have sort of left unsaid in the last hour and a quarter? Is there something that we want to
Well,
sort of?
I just want to share this with you. It's and I may have shared it with you as we talked before. Um, we um, we had as you know, I'm very political, obviously, but we had Governor Wes Moore up for breakfast a couple of weeks ago, and I was really struck by a statement he said, and he said, um, "I come from the Marines, and in the Marines, we leave no one behind,
Mhm.
and that's how I run my state." And so for me, I was so moved by that because I felt what a reflection of diversity, what a reflection of veterans, that being a veteran allowed this concept of leadership to be transferred. And we could take that concept of leadership and transfer it to business and have
Mhm.
individuals say, I've been a Marine. I'm going to leave no one behind. And all of you are a part of this effort. And
Mhm.
you're with me and you're coming with me and we're going to get the job done.
Oh,
And
that's beautiful.
I loved how he thought about that. And I love how we could think about the added diversity value that being a veteran adds.
Mhm. Well and beautifully said, Carol. Thank you very much. Ellen, is there anything in the chat that we need to address before we move on to close?
No, I think there was an interesting commentary. I guess the CEO of John Hancock had a recent op-ed, and
Yes.
I don't if you're familiar with Carol, maybe you can express
Mm-hmm.
what was said by the CEO of Hancock, and is that something important just to add to the conversation?
I think at the end of the day, the way that I choose to acknowledge the commentary is that David was saying that, similarly to what we said, David was saying that I hire talent that is going to be profitable for the company, period. And so all the other stuff I left behind. But he was saying, at the end of the day, difference is profitable. And I worked for that company, and there was a lot of diversity, and he believed in it because he believed in the difference that you added. And it was about bringing value to the company. He may have said it differently in the op-ed, but because you were able to bring value, profitability to the company, you were important. And that's how I choose to believe I was able to succeed there for 14 years and was able to move up to senior vice president of marketing for John Hancock. Um, but I do believe it is all about what you can add, what you bring. And we, as individuals of difference, as Chris says, have a whole network, different network, think differently. We have our own mindset, bring a different perspective that at the end of the day adds value. So that's how I choose to interpret the op-ed.
Yeah, Carol, well said again. And thinking again of sort of how to um, reflect on this whole conversation this afternoon, I think what should we our message to the boards of directors are stay the course, focus on the prize, focus on the business case, keep your eyes on the prize, and don't let a lot of this heat and light around us distract us. You know, we need to keep focused on what's going to create value
Yeah,
and how we expand our networks and how we make the world a better place by including, as you say, including everybody.
yeah.
That's just so beautifully said. Thank you, Carol.
No, thank you. And look how we've been able to connect and understand the commonality of our interests
Mm-hmm.
far greater than our differences. And it's because we have the opportunity to work together. And
Yeah.
that's what work does. So
Oh,
thank
so
you
true.
for this opportunity, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I think Beth is going to wrap us up.
I will. And yes, a big round of applause for Carol and for your very deft moderation. Mr. Odleyson for the discussion. I am so proud of our chapter. We started this series in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and we have continued it, and we will continue it over time, especially now when these issues are really front and center in the national conversation and in conversations within our companies and those boardrooms. So thank you again, Carol, and such an expert coming up from the business side and the business case for our diversity and inclusion efforts is really just the key, as we've heard umpteen times today. So thank you all for coming. And we invite you to our upcoming events for the NACD New England chapter. Our next event is on March 12th, which is going to be the first in-person event that we've had for a couple of months because many people clear out during the winter. And on March 12th, we are going to have an in-person event, which is a cyber war games simulation, which is going to be very, very worthwhile and very informative. We did a similar one for an executive compensation simulation last year, and now we're doing it for cyber war games. So we invite you to that. And I want to especially highlight our 2 all-day programs that are going to come up very soon. On April 12th, we have our all-day program for aspiring directors. And then on June 10th, we have our all-day program for existing experienced public company directors, where we limit the number of people in the room. We take you through soup to nuts during the course of the day. If there is one day that you spend getting your director education, this is the day to spend doing it on June 10th, where you get to hear from experts and also have that critical peer-to-peer conversations during the course of the day. We also, as always, request that you fill out our survey. You will see a link in the chat. There's our QR code. You're also going to get an email. We hope that as among the 70 some odd people who were here at the program today, that we get 70 some odd responses back to our surveys. We listen to them, we pay attention to them, so we hope that you will fill them out so that it can help guide us for our future programming. Thank you all once again. Thank you to Carol and to Chris, and we will see you shortly on a virtual screen or in person.
Thank
Aye.
you.